Welcome to Reddit Aliens. Serious. People who have experienced the paranormal or seen cryptid or other unknown creatures. What's your story? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Teenage girl in the 80s was killed in a freak accident after running away from home in my hometown. Had heard stories for years about people seeing her. She died riding her bike wearing a baseball cap, which is what people had described seeing her wearing. One night I was coming home real late, and I was stopped at a red light all by myself, and I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I turned and looked, and there she was, baseball cap and all, on her bike, staring at me. I then looked back forward a millisecond and then looked over again. She was gone. One day my wife came home. We were living in an apartment in Midtown. It's about 10 p.m. I was taking the trash to the dumpster, and from there you could see the doors of all the apartments. There were only 6. And I saw her walking up, but didn't want to yell because it was late and I didn't want to scare the neighbors. I see the door open, obviously figured she opened it, but it was dark so I didn't actually see her do it. And she kind of leans in but won't walk in. She won't go inside. I could hear her calling for me, and when I got behind her and said hi, she became frantic, asking me, "How the F did you do that? How did you get back outside?" I explained I'd been at the dumpster emptying the trash, and she said, "No, you opened the door for me and walked upstairs. I called after you and you turned your head and looked at me but didn't say anything and just kept walking." And she started crying. I searched the apartment, found nothing. We moved about 6 months later to the house we're at now. She thought she saw me walk past windows that look into the backyard from the kitchen, but it wasn't. And again, she said it looked just like me, and that it walked all the way around the house before disappearing. And then she realized I was in the bedroom. Creepy stuff. This is my sister's story, and I don't know if it's paranormal or not, but she thought it was a little spooky. She lived in a tiny little studio apartment one summer and came home to quickly get a bite to eat, wash up, and go back out with friends. She puts some bread in the toaster and goes to the bathroom to wash face, do makeup, etc. She hears the toaster pop and comes out to get it, but the toast is nowhere to be found. She checked the floors, counters, everywhere, and it was just gone. Toaster was still hot. Really weirded her out. Ghost Toast? Sounds like a good name for a band. I don't know. What do you think? I remember as a kid, I would explore old abandoned houses and buildings. One time, I heard a rattling noise while in this 2-story house, followed by the sound upstairs, and saw a leather belt on the ground, writhing around and twisting like a serpent. I was too scared to touch it and ran away. There was nothing in that room that could have caused it. No windows for drafts or anything. Sometimes I think I just dreamt it because it was so long ago, but it felt so real, and I can remember all the details. I saw a UFO when I was 11 years old. I will swear on this until the day I die. It was around 9 to 9:30 at night, and it was the springtime. I was wide awake, completely sober, not on any meds. I looked out the window, and in between my house and my neighbor's house was a bunch of trees. It was a wooded area. Well, on the ground in the wooded area was a UFO, except the physical surroundings were unaffected. None of the trees were crushed. This UFO sat there for about 5 to 10 minutes, then slowly took off in the air, and just went around in circles as it got higher, and as it got higher, the circles got wider. This lasted another 5 minutes or so until it vanished. Went on a fishing weekend with best bud in college. Stayed at his grandpa's house in the middle of bum F nowhere. We were sleeping in the sunroom as it was a gorgeous night, and I was asking my friend about the noises, deer, foxes, and the like. Then we hear what is best described as a scream or wail. His grandpa came out of the house and said, "You boys just come on, sleep on the couches now." Never offered an explanation, and I didn't question shit. 90-year-old man with a 12 gauge in his hand says move, you move. I'm convinced I've had something following me for years, possibly my entire life. I've always had weird things happening to me. Weird experiences like as a kid, I don't remember it, but my mom told me about it. I would wake her up asking about the person in my doorway. Then, later when my parents first started leaving me home alone, I remember having to call them multiple times and have them rush home or someone come get me because I could swear I wasn't alone in the house. Living with my parents, I would hear footsteps upstairs when no one else is home. Once had my wife, while we were just dating, there, and she heard it too. I would shut a door, and then later that door would be wide open. At me and my wife's first townhome, things would fly off the shelves, Like once a box of spaghetti noodles tucked away in the back of the pantry behind other things found its way to the ground without disturbing anything in the front of it. Pictures would fly off and away from walls, but none of the others would even be rocking. Same footsteps upstairs. Weird things like my ukulele strumming itself in another room. I have very specific and detailed stories, but it's a lot to type out. I don't really care if anyone believes me, but I know what I've seen and felt. So mine is dumb, but it's the closest I've got. Summer of 2020. I just finished up working on an outdoor drive-in concert and was standing around chatting with the rest of the crew as the audience cleared out. Mid-conversation, I saw a woman walk behind the group wheeling a bicycle. I was the only one facing her. I don't know what came over me, but as soon as I saw her, I said out loud, "That's an effing ghost." When I looked again, she was gone. What makes this bizarre to me is that it was perfectly reasonable for there to be a woman wheeling a bicycle through the parking lot. A big concert had just ended, so it's not surprising. What was weird was that when I saw this totally normal thing, my brain immediately and unequivocally recognized her as a ghost. So I was taking a shower when I suddenly heard a faint voice like a woman sobbing. I got out almost immediately. Apparently my stepdad had experienced the same thing and had also seen what he thought was a girl sitting on his side of the bed. But me and my mom were both out of state at the time. Our things will randomly go missing and reappear as well. Mild, but some Filipinos believe that when a loved one dies, it's common for them to visit you in a dream one last time to say goodbye. As a kid, I experienced this, though I had no way to know my Lola had just passed. She was sick, but had been for some time, and I didn't know she had died that night, and also didn't know about the belief. I never really dreamt about her normally, and most of my family experienced it the same night. It was just a mundane dream. She was just there, and it was like how her usual visits would be. No profound messages, just some last time with her. I miss her very much. Chupacabra are just coyotes with mange. That's why as soon as Hollywood came up with the name, the whole Southwest was like, shit, I've seen that. They sure look like something paranormal. A healthy coyote doesn't act like one dying of mange, and the abnormal behavior is pretty creepy all on its own. Most of my creepy experiences had pretty straightforward explanations, like feeding the cat and then my cat walked in through the cat flap. There really was a second cat. He didn't look that much like mine when I was paying attention, but at first glance, their heads and backs were close enough to make the mistake. Another story, isn't mine but a friend's. A tropical storm hit, and she was watching the weather for updates on the tornado watch or warnings when she heard her cat scratching and crying like mad at the front door. Horrified her pet was outside in the storm, she rushed downstairs to let her in. Her mom caught her just before she got to the door and stopped her. She said, "That's not our cat," and pointed to where the cat was, cowering in a corner, eyes glued to the door. They crept around to a bedroom window to look at the front porch and discovered it was a pair of bobcats that were scratching and crying at the door. After some frantic discussion, they opened the garage door part way to give them shelter so the bobcats wouldn't damage the door any more than they already had. It took a few minutes, but the bobcats left the shelter of the porch and entered the garage and ate the cat food there. One of the bobcats gave birth in their garage that night. As soon as the storm passed and the water receded about a day later, the bobcats carried the kittens back to their den. Based on where we sighted the kittens after that, we think the mama cat was in labor when the storm flooded her den. We think the bobcats had watched her cat come and go and figured any port in a storm. Still, they were very creeped out for weeks after. If they had cameras in their house, allowing bobcats into the garage would have made for a pretty cool video. My first year of university, a girl I lived with had her friend over one night. He'd been shooting footage on London Bridge at 3 a.m. to get some shots of it abandoned at night. He was really riled up about something and insisted we watch it with the audio up all the way and listen closely. Around the 1-minute mark, I heard a low, deeply menacing voice whisper slowly, "As you walk the devil's path," then something unintelligible, then death. It felt so final and evil. He turned to us and said, "Did you hear it?" I said I'd heard a voice. Say, what did it say? I told him what I'd heard. His face went white. "You heard the exact same thing as me. You're not the first." My housemate said she'd heard the same thing as well. He hadn't heard the voice when he was on the bridge, only when he was working on the audio, but he'd shown it to other people who had heard the same thing. I don't really have any other paranormal encounters, so this one might not stand out, but I'm generally wary of paranormal shit, and this still scared me. There was some sort of presence on that bridge at night. It wanted to make itself known. I don't ever want to know what it was. My dad used to work at a haunted house and wanted to add a ghost story to the website to get more people to come. He hired a medium to look around the place to see if she sensed anything. My dad didn't really believe in the stuff though. Halfway through the tour, she asks if my father was missing a hammer. He said he was missing a lot of his tools. The medium said an old woman died on the floor above had the hammer. My dad asked the spirit to give it back, and the next day, it was laying on the table. After that, he left flowers for the spirit, and it never took anything again. One time as a teenager, I was making something to eat randomly, heard a bunch of birds chirping super loud. I look up and into the living room and see at least 20 spirit birds flying around the room. Think the old-style white light effects they used for Tinkerbell? I was a little weirded out, not too much. At the point, I was used to hearing or seeing spirits, and was also hearing, "Say hi to Mom." So I asked her, I said, "Hey Mom, did you ever have birds? Like lots of birds before I was born?" She stopped and looked very confused. She said, "Yeah, I had close to 24 wild parakeets when I was a teenager. Why?" I told her, because they were all flying around the living room saying hi right then. She had never mentioned before having had birds. Back in June of 2020, my friend, his wife, my dad, and some of my friends' friends all went on a ghost investigation at Benson Grist Mill. It's a 100-plus-year-old mill that was made by one of the leaders of the Mormon church at the time. Once I got onto the property, I instantly felt like I had an apple lodged in my throat. I thought it was anxiety, and I just brushed it off. We entered into a house that was on the property and tried to get an EVP recording. It felt like something was trying to shove me to the ground. I then met up with my friend in the basement of the mill, and I began to cry for no reason. His wife helped me get out of the mill and calm down. After about 30 minutes, I felt the presence of a child telling me to go to the schoolhouse. It's as if the child was trying to comfort me. I found out later there was a little girl who died near the mill. I woke up the next morning with bruises on my neck. I went back again and something else happened. Well, what else happened at the grist mill when you went back? We don't want to know. This happened to me around 2006 to 2007 in the summertime. My family and friends live pretty remotely in the middle of nowhere near woods, trails, and cornfields. During school, my friends told me about how her family decided to adopt a new religion, whatever that meant. She explained her family went into a big city to speak to a religious zealot medium who can see stuff that we can't. She told me this medium knew there was a trail that led behind her house and knew there was a cornfield mixed in with the woods as well as behind her home. Nothing spooky about that, seems pretty common knowledge given the area. Well, the medium also told her there is a demon extraterrestrial mytho creature that manifests itself behind the home in the woods around 3:14 a.m. in the morning, and it tries to communicate through my friend and thus why she has chronic hiccups. Now, of course, when she told me all of this, I didn't buy into any of it and thought it would be a perfect opportunity to scare my other friends who were girls in my class. We were all friends, but I liked one of the girls and the part is irrelevant to the story. Anyway, so I explained the story to two of my friends, and we decided we would go out to the woods that night right behind my other friend's house in hopes to see this demon or whatever. The girls drove their car over to my house because we could walk to the trails from my house with no problem around 2:30 a.m. It took us about 15 minutes of walking to get to the location. The way the trail forms was pretty spooky because the trees kind of hooked over us, forming a tunnel of leaves and limbs. It was extremely clear that night, and the sound of insects and wildlife was prevalent, so it wasn't that creepy. Time goes on, and I'm sitting on the ground, and one friend is playing on her flip phone, and the girl I liked was talking to me. 3:14 a.m. rolls around, and I start taunting whatever this thing is, and I start throwing rocks into the cornfield and fast woods nearby. About 5 minutes pass, and we decide to head back. No longer did it take for me to stand up and take 3 steps. Everything around us got dead silent. No crickets chirping, no movement. Out of the blue, about 6 feet in front of us to the right, a large branch snaps in two, and we hear the most ominous growl I've ever heard in my life. I've lived here my whole life and hunted. I have never heard an animal sound like that. By the sound of the limb snap, we fully expected to see something step out of the brush and greet us. Nothing did. The girls jumped behind me, and we just stared at the spot for a solid minute trying to comprehend what it was. We couldn't see a dang thing. It was pitch black, and our little flip phones didn't have the flashlight like these new phones have. I took a few pebbles on the ground and chucked them in the direction of the noise. Nothing. I decided it wasn't worth the risk of the girl's safety to head the direction we came, so I told them to run the other way, and I'll lag behind just in case it's a predator that likes to chase. It'll get to me first. As soon as they took off, absolutely nothing followed us. We managed to cut through the woods and onto a roadway that led by my house. We got back home around 4 a.m. To this day, I have absolutely no idea what it was. We went back a year later and nothing ever occurred again. I still hear the growl in my head, and it sends chills down my arm. I have a lot of stories, but I'll talk about my camp. My family camp has been in my family for generations. It's an old Native American land with a burial site. We have found many things on the land from our ancestors. We have the leader of the tribe that will ride his horse across the top of our sand pit and watch over us. The best thing that ever happened to us, one night, as we were all asleep in our campers, something came to every camper and ran around them, knocking on them. When we all came outside, we realized the river was flooding really badly, and we had to hightail it out of there. The next day, after the rain stopped, we went back to find our little bridge had floated downstream. We had to get some paddle boats from my aunt's house to cross the river, and once we got back to camp, we saw that it was all flooded up to the doors of the camper. If we had stayed there all night, we would have been stuck there, and our vehicles could have been ruined. But luckily, something that night warned us ahead of time.